This is the final video on Aristotle's theory of friendship and on Aristotle himself. And this video refers to Book 9, especially to chapters 3 and 4 of Book 9. I want to begin with Aristotle's comments on the difficult topic of deciding when to end a friendship. And of course, this comes up more in our closer friendships than it does in the more distant ones. So Aristotle looks at two cases where it might make sense to end a friendship. The first of those two cases is you grow up alongside someone and you mature and the other person doesn't, right? The other person more or less remains a child. They don't grow beyond a certain age and a certain state of life. Maybe they never really become independent. Maybe they never really develop their talents. But in any case, you progress, and you progress way beyond where you were when you were a child, and they do not. And Aristotle says it's inevitable that at some point the distance between the two of you is going to become so great that it doesn't make any sense for you to be friends anymore. But he also makes the point that it's appropriate still to have affection for those people and to be willing to do favors for them, to be partial in the way that John Stuart Mill talks about in his text, in honor of and in memory of the friendship that once was. So that case tends to be pretty easy. But the other case is when you have had a good, close friendship, more or less a friendship of virtue, with someone who was a pretty good person, but their life takes a downhill turn, right? And you see them becoming worse and worse. And so the character gap, you might call it, between the two of you gets greater and greater. In that case, we're probably going to consider whether to break off the friendship. But there are grounds, Aristotle thinks, for not doing so too quickly. One is simply that we've invested so much time and energy, and this has been such a good and valuable relationship so far, that we should let go of it somewhat slowly. A second reason is that a bad person cannot easily drag a good person down, right? If someone is fairly secure in their good character, in their moral character, then it's relatively difficult for someone whose moral character has degenerated somewhat to drag that person down with them. Of course, at some point, you may very well say, yeah, thus far and no further. I'm not afraid that I'm going to be dragged down with you. But at a certain point, it becomes too painful for me to watch because I have empathy for you. And ultimately, I'm really angry with you for doing this to yourself, my close friend whom I value so deeply. Okay, but so that can become intolerable. But the worry is not really that the bad person is going to make the good person worse. But the third reason is not all dips in character are incurable. And you can think about Aristotle's discussion of intemperance and incontinence. And in the case of both intemperance and incontinence, there is some hope for change. In the case of the intemperate person, you may be able to convince them that their point of view, that the pursuit of excessive pleasure is good, is a mistaken point of view. And if you can convince them of that, they're probably going to live differently. In the case of the incontinent person, if you can call on the regret that they feel for indulging in the excessive pleasure that they know to be bad for them, and in some cases even bad for the society, there's some hope of helping them. And essentially what Aristotle wants to say here is as long as there is some hope that you can be helpful to them in bringing back the good character that they possessed before, you should hold on to the friendship. And even if you find it necessary to break off the friendship, it's like the friendship with the childhood friend who doesn't grow and you do. Again, there's a maturity gap, or in this case, there's a character gap. In both of those cases, Aristotle says it's appropriate, if you do break off the friendship, to maintain affection for that person and a positive disposition toward that person. Okay, now I'm on the 4th page of the handout, and this is about friendship with oneself, or what Aristotle calls self-love. And part of what Aristotle is doing here is trying to differentiate between good self-love and selfishness. And it's very important to him that we not mistake the one for the other. So let's have a look at what he says, but one more preliminary, which is you can think back to the virtue of magnanimity, right? This is the person who is worthy of great honor and knows that she's worthy of great honor. And it's possible when we start to look at the friendship of the good person with oneself, it's possible that magnanimity has to be in place. That is, be honorable, but also having an accurate view of oneself as an honorable and worthy person. That's a condition of the possibility of the best kind of friendship with oneself, authentic self-love. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side and describe the relationship that the base or bad or vicious person for Aristotle has with himself. So he says, I kind of messed up this quotation, didn't have time to correct it. Base people are at odds with themselves, and having an appetite for one set of things, wish for another, the way that people with lack of self-control do. And so the picture that Aristotle paints of the vicious person is of someone who is in conflict with himself, right? This is someone who's divided within themselves, who wants one thing but also wants another thing. So maybe they want close friends, but they're also very greedy, and so they want as much money as they can possibly get their hands on. So this is a person who's divided against themselves. And of course, if you are your own enemy, if you're constantly arguing with yourself, constantly in conflict with yourself, it's hard to be friends with yourself, because you're not really a unified person, right? And so these different desires tend to pull the person in different directions. The second box, depraved people seek others with whom to spend their days, but flee from themselves, since when they are by themselves, they remember many repellent things and expect others like them in the future, whereas when they are with others, they forget these. And so this is the person who is constantly looking for distractions because they have regret, like the incontinent person. They have a lot of regret. They have a lot of bad memories that they want to forget. It's difficult. They probably have nightmares at night, even during the day when they're awake. They have nightmarish thoughts. And so they want to find other people who are going to distract them from themselves. And that's the basis for their friendships. But it also means they are not able to be alone, which also means they're not able to be with themselves. And so they're not able to have this close friendship with themselves. They're also just not very lovable, the third box, right? We tend to love good people for being lovable. Also, friendships of pleasure for being pleasurable. But if you can't find pleasure in hanging out with yourself, you can't even have a good friendship of pleasure with yourself. And he says, it seems too that the base person, the bad person, does all of his actions for the sake of himself. And the more depraved he is, the more he does so. So this makes it difficult for the person even to be a friend of pleasure, right? This is the person who won't share they bring the 6-pack of beer into the party with them, and their intention is to drink it all themselves. They have no intention of sharing it. And so it's difficult for that person even to have the most basic kind of friendship, to have a friendship of pleasure. And likewise in business transactions, let's say, which really fall under friendships of utility, they tend to cheat. Bad people tend to cheat. And so the mutuality of the benefit is not there. And so it's difficult for them to have trusting business relationships, because even though that doesn't depend upon someone's character being good, if someone is bad enough to be determined every time they make a deal to get the advantage, right? And never to allow you to earn your own profit, to pursue your own benefit, the benefit will never be mutual. And so that friendship is not going to last. But certainly the base person cannot have close friendships, cannot be a friend of virtue, because they're not virtuous. They don't have that to offer. They're not whole in themselves. They're very divided within themselves. And so they can't offer that wholeness to another person. And so that fourth box, right? The base person is constantly doing actions for their own sake. That's the person who's truly selfish, not the person who loves themselves in the full sense as someone who possesses a virtuous character. And so Aristotle says in the last box, it makes sense to call those people selfish, but that's not genuine self-love, right? We should pay attention to the fact that there's another kind of self-love, and that's the love of the virtuous person for herself. That's genuine self-love, because that's a person who is whole, and in their wholeness is able to love themselves. Incidentally, that's also the person who can offer the best friendships of pleasure, the best friendships of utility, and it's the only kind of person who can offer another virtuous person the friendship of virtue. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at the left-hand side of this page. This person is of one mind with himself, right? This is not someone who is experiencing deep conflicts. They might deliberate about their values and so forth, but this is not someone who asks themselves, should I do the right thing or should I do the pleasant thing? This is a person who's going to do the right thing out of their character as something that follows fairly naturally, or as second nature from their character. Likewise, he says, such a person wishes to pass the time with himself. Why? Because it's pleasurable, right? This is someone who's a good person, knows that she's a good person, and enjoys spending time with herself. And so she doesn't have to look for this distraction. The memories, this person's memories of the past are good. They don't experience a great deal of regret over the past, and they don't have a lot of fear about the future. I forgot to mention that the evil person, or the person who is base, is someone who has a lot of fear about the future, because all kinds of bad things have happened in the past as a result of their bad character and the bad things they've done to other people, and so they expect bad things to happen in the future. In the third box here, Aristotle makes the point, this is the support for the point that I made earlier, that it's only the person who has genuine self-love who is able to offer true friendship to someone else. Also, the virtuous person, next box, is someone who tends to disregard their own interests, right? Not to be selfish. This is the true self-lover, but the person who is not selfish in the way that the depraved person is. This is someone who's not always looking to their own interests, but is also looking to the interests of those around them. And if you look at the top of this handout under friendship with oneself, self-love, I give you my really my favorite quotation from Aristotle, which is, "A friend is another self." What it means, one of the things that it means, one thing it means is the friend reflects back to us the character that we ourselves have. Viewing someone as an extension, essentially, of ourselves means that if we do good things to our friend, we're also doing good things for ourselves, because the thriving of our friend is a part of our own thriving. It makes me happier if my closest friends are happier. So a friend is another self in that sense too, not just reflecting back to me the character that I have, but also in the sense that when I do good things for the friend, it is as if I'm doing good friends for myself, because my sense of identity extends to cover that other person, right? The friendship of or relationship of parents to children, in the best case, is like that. So that concludes Aristotle's treatment of friendship, which I think in a lot of ways, many of us think it's the pinnacle, really the climax of Aristotle's moral philosophy. We've finished talking about that, and that also concludes our discussion of Aristotle in this course.